time to sleep. The challenge is simple, to have you dreaming before this single video ends. Tonight, we delve into the story of the Anunnaki.
In the quiet dust of what was once ancient Mesopotamia lie the first stories humanity ever recorded. Etched in cuneiform script on tablets of clay, these primordial tales speak of gods who descended from the sky to shape the world and oversee the earth. They were called the Anunnaki, the descendants of the sky god, An. For millennia, we have known these accounts as myth, but what if they are more? What if these are not just allegories for nature, but the fragmented memories of a history so profound it was mistaken for divine revelation? The tablets tell of a time when the burden of these gods was far too heavy, their labor unbearably hard, and in response to this cosmic toil, they made a decision that would forever alter the destiny of this world. They decided to create a helper, a primitive worker, fashioned in their image to carry the weight of their labor. They decided to create humankind. And before we drift too deep into the mists of time, allow me a brief, quiet moment. If you find a sense of peace and wonder here, a simple like or subscription is a silent way of letting me know we've connected. I always love to see in the comments where you are listening from in the world and what hour the night holds for you. It's a quiet reminder that we are all under the same sky. Now, let the world outside fade away. Dim the lights. Find your comfortable space and let us begin our journey together. Let your mind drift back, past the noise of our modern world, beyond the pages of written history, to a time when the earth was young. The mountains were sharper then, the rivers ran wilder, and the great plains of Mesopotamia were a vast, untamed canvas awaiting the artist's hand. In this primordial dawn, there were no humans. The world belonged only to the gods. The great Anunnaki, who had descended from the heavens, had established their order. They were the architects of destiny, the cosmic royalty who decreed the fates. But they were not laborers. The immense task of shaping the world, of carving civilization from chaos, fell to a different class of deities. They were the lesser gods, the Igigi. It was their divine hands that dug the first canals, their immortal backs that bent to raise the first dikes. They dredged the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers, channeling their life-giving waters to tame the arid land. For 40 long years, a period of unimaginable duration, they performed this sacred labor. Every sunrise brought with it the same grueling reality, a continuation of a task that seemed to have no end. Imagine the scene, a line of divine beings stretching to the horizon, their forms shimmering in the relentless heat. The only sounds are the rhythmic scrape and bite of their tools against the stubborn earth, the sharp crack of rock, and the heavy synchronized exhalation of beings pushed to their limits. The sun, a merciless eye in a cloudless sky, baked the ground into a cracked mosaic and beat down upon their shoulders. The dust, fine as powder, coated their skin, filled their lungs, and turned the very air into a gritty haze. They were gods, but the sweat that trickled down their brows felt startlingly real, and the ache that settled deep into their bones was a burden that even divinity could not ease. Night brought little respite. They would collapse in their dwellings, the silence of the evening heavy with unspoken grievances. The stars would wheel overhead, indifferent to their suffering. In the darkness, whispers began to circulate, murmurs of discontent, quiet at first, but growing in volume and intensity with each passing cycle of sun and moon. They began to question the decree. Why must they, celestial beings, endure a fate of endless, back-breaking toil, while the Anunnaki resided in celestial splendor? The labor was unbearably hard, the physical toll immense. The burden of the gods was far too heavy. The resentment festered, a slow-burning fire in the hearts of the Ajiji. It was no longer just about the physical strain. It was about the indignity, the perceived injustice of their lot. The turning point came on the 40th year. One night, under the pale light of the moon, a leader among Timor, perhaps the sentiment simply boiled over in a single, collective moment of clarity, cried out, "Enough!" The word, a single spark, ignited the inferno of rebellion. They would not face another dawn in the trenches. They rose as one, a silent, grim army, and their first act was one of profound symbolism. They took up their spades, their baskets, their tools of creation and servitude, and they destroyed them. They burned their spades in a great pyre, the flames leaping into the night sky, a defiant signal to their masters. They had declared war on their own labor. Their second act was even bolder. Wiping the grime of their toil from their faces, they marched. Their procession was not a chaotic mob, but an organized, determined force. They made their way across the plains they had so painfully shaped their destination, the very heart of power, the compound of Enlil. Enlil, the mighty god of wind, air, and storms, was the chief administrator of the Anunnaki on earth, the overseer of their great works. It was his command they had followed, and it was against him they now directed their fury. They surrounded his house, a silent, menacing ring of exhausted but resolute deities. They did not shout or brandish weapons. Their silent, collective presence was far more potent. The work on earth had stopped. The order of the cosmos had been broken. Inside his great house, Enlil was awakened by the suffocating silence. He looked out to see the siege, and his fury was immense. His gatekeeper, Nusku, barred the door, his own face pale with alarm. Enlil, the great warrior, the enforcer of Anunnaki law, felt not fear, but a profound sense of betrayal. He saw this not as a plea for help, but as an act of mutiny. He summoned his own weapons, his mind set on a swift and brutal suppression. But the matter was too great for one god to decide. The crisis was escalated to the highest authority. The great Anunnaki Council was convened. Anu, the father of the gods, his voice carrying the weight of the heavens, demanded to know who was responsible for this insurrection. Enlil, his son, stood before the council, his rage barely contained. He recounted the events, painting the Ajiji as mutineers who deserved punishment. "Every single one of us gods has declared war," he proclaimed, his voice thundering in the assembly. As Enlil spoke, however, another presence made itself known. It was Enki, the god of wisdom, creation, and the deep waters. He was Enlil's brother, but where Enlil was fire and force, Enki was water and ingenuity. He listened patiently to the grievances, his expression thoughtful. He understood the plight of the Ajiji. He saw the folly in responding with violence, for the work still needed to be done, and a war between gods would consume them all. When he spoke, his voice was calm, a soothing balm on the inflamed passions of the council. He defended the Ijiji, not their actions, but their motivations. The labor, he conceded, was indeed too much for them. Then he offered his revolutionary solution. "Why do we blame them?" he asked the assembly. "Their work was too hard. Their distress was too great. Instead of punishment, he proposed creation. He suggested they create a new being, a substitute, to bear the toil. Let a new creature," he proposed, "carry the weight of the gods." The idea was audacious. To create life, a new form of sentient being, simply to solve a labor dispute. The council was silent. The weight of the proposal settling upon them. Enki elaborated. He would need the help of the mother goddess, Mami, the womb goddess who could shape life. And the creature he envisioned would be called a Lulu, a primitive man. The decision was made. Enki's wisdom prevailed over Enlil's rage. The mother goddess was summoned and the task was laid before her. You are the birth goddess, the creator of mankind, Enki declared. Create a mortal that he may bear the yoke. This mortal would be fashioned from the substance of the earth itself, but it would need something more to give it life and understanding. It needed a divine spark. The Anunnaki decided that one of the gods would have to be sacrificed. From this slain god, from his blood and his spirit, the new creature would gain its divine essence, its intelligence. They chose a god who had been a leader of the rebellion, a being who had the intelligence. He was slain, and the mother goddess, Mami, took his flesh and blood. She mixed it with clay, the same clay the Ajiji had toiled in. She trod the mixture, her actions, a sacred, creative dance. Enki stood beside her, the wise creator, and as she worked the clay, he recited incantations, weaving magic and intention into the substance. The other gods gathered, their earlier anger replaced by awe. They spat upon the clay, a ritual act of blessing, further mingling their own divine nature with the nascent form. From this mixture of earth and heaven, of clay and God's blood, of mortal substance and immortal spirit, the first humans were fashioned. They were created not out of love or loneliness or a desire for companionship, but for a purpose. Their destiny was written before they drew their first breath, to work the mines, to dig the canals, to till the fields, to perform the physical toil that had broken their divine predecessors. Thus, the crisis was averted. The EGG were freed from their unbearable burden, and humanity, born from a divine rebellion and a stroke of creative genius, took its first steps onto the world stage. We were made to serve, to lift the burden from the gods, unaware that the divine spark sleeping within our own blood held the potential to one day make us their equals. The great work of the Anunnaki on Earth could now continue, carried on the backs of their newest, most ingenious creation. The story of our creation, as told by the ancient clay tablets of Mesopotamia, gives us a reason, a purpose, born from the conflict of the gods. It is a tale of divine labor and divine intervention. But if we quiet our minds and listen to the silence between the etched lines of cuneiform, another layer of this story begins to emerge. It is a modern interpretation, a controversial yet compelling hypothesis that asks us to see the Anunnaki not as gods in the supernatural sense, but as physical beings, travelers from another world, driven by motives that are terrifyingly familiar, desperation, and the will to survive. To understand their journey to Earth, we must first travel far from it, across the immense, dark void of interplanetary space, to their supposed home, a planet called Nibiru. In the ancient Sumerian language, the name is thought to mean planet of the crossing, a world with a vast, elliptical orbit that brings it through our own solar system only once every several thousand years. This was not a mythical heaven or a spiritual realm. Proponents of this theory see it as a physical world, a terrestrial body with continents, oceans, and cities inhabited by a civilization far older and more advanced than our own. But Nibiru, for all its ancient majesty, was dying. It was a world facing a dire crisis, a planet enduring a catastrophic climate disaster. The problem was its atmosphere, the delicate, gaseous shield that protected the surface from the harsh radiation of space and regulated its climate. This vital veil was deteriorating at an alarming rate. thinning and dissipating into the void. The reasons for this decay are lost to time, perhaps the natural result of its long, cold journey through deep space, or perhaps a self-inflicted environmental wound from their own advanced technologies. Whatever the cause, the effect was devastating. Imagine a world where the sky is slowly losing its color, fading from a vibrant hue to a pale, sickly wash. Imagine a sun that appears dimmer with each passing generation, its light struggling to pierce the thinning, hazy air. The weather would have become erratic and violent, with devastating storms and plummeting temperatures. The great cities of the Anunnaki, marvels of engineering and architecture, might have been forced to retreat behind immense crystalline domes, desperately trying to preserve what little air remained. Life on the surface would have become a struggle, the land growing barren as the very breath of the planet grew thin. The Anunnaki were a civilization of scientists, engineers, and thinkers. They did not appeal to superstition or pray for salvation. They sought a solution. Their finest minds gathered in great councils, analyzing atmospheric data, running complex simulations, and debating every possible course of action. They were in a race against the slow, inexorable death of their own world. After countless attempts and failed theories, their scientists made a breakthrough. They discovered a single, elegant, and incredibly challenging solution. The answer lay in a precious metal, gold. Not as a symbol of wealth, but as an instrument of planetary salvation. Their studies revealed that gold, when processed into a fine monatomic powder and dispersed into the highest layers of Nibiru's atmosphere, could work as a perfect shield. The microscopic particles would remain suspended, reflecting the harsh solar radiation during its long passes near the sun, and insulating the planet, preventing further atmospheric loss during its cold journey into deep space. It was a feat of planetary geoengineering on a scale we can barely comprehend. The theory was sound. The technology to process and disperse the gold was within their grasp. But one colossal problem remained: the sheer quantity of gold required. To create a shield for an entire planet, they would need millions of tons of it. They quickly exhausted their own planet's resources, their mining operations yielding only a fraction of what was needed. A chilling realization settled upon the Anunnaki. Their salvation was not on Nibiru. It lay elsewhere, out there, in the stars. And so, a new age began for the Anunnaki, an age of exploration, born not from curiosity, but from necessity. They began a desperate search, exploring other celestial bodies for this one precious metal. Great interstellar vessels were commissioned, ships capable of undertaking long and perilous interplanetary journeys. These were not crude, chemical-fueled rockets, but sophisticated crafts that, according to modern interpretations, may have utilized technologies like anti-gravitational propulsion, allowing them to bend the fabric of space-time and traverse the vast distances between stars. Imagine the solemn departure of these great arc ships from the dying world of Nibiru. They would lift silently from the planet's wounded surface, passing through the thin, failing atmosphere and into the blackness of space, carrying the hope of their entire civilization. Their mission was to scan, to probe, to analyze every planet, moon, and asteroid in every system they could reach, searching for the unique geological signature of gold. For centuries, perhaps millennia, they searched. They would have encountered countless worlds, gas giants with storms larger than planets, frozen orbs of methane ice, volcanic worlds racked by fire, and barren, cratered rocks devoid of any resources. With each empty system, the hope must have dimmed, the weight of their dying home world pressing down upon them. And then they entered our solar system. As they passed the great outer planets, their long-range sensors would have detected something remarkable. In the third orbit from the central star, a small, vibrant world, a blue and white jewel of water, clouds, and life. But it wasn't the presence of life that made their instruments sing with purpose. It was the planet's geological composition. Deep within the crust of this world, their scans revealed what they had sought for so long: vast, deep veins of gold, more gold than they could have imagined. This planet, which its future inhabitants would one day call Earth, was their last, best hope. They guided their ships into orbit, their immense vessels, casting fleeting shadows over the primitive world below. The decision was made. They would mount a massive expedition, a long-term mining operation to extract the gold from this primitive world and ferry it back across the solar system to save Nibiru. This, the theory proposes, was the true reason for their arrival. They did not come as conquerors seeking territory or as gods seeking worship. They came as a technologically superior civilization on the most urgent of missions, to gather the resources needed to save their home. They were miners, and the native life they observed on the planet below the various species of hominids such as Homo habilis and Homo erectus that roamed the plains were, at first, little more than a curiosity, a biological feature of the landscape they had come to harvest. They could not have known then that the destiny of their own civilization and the fate of these primitive creatures would soon become inextricably and violently intertwined. Their quest for gold would lead them down a path that would force them to play God, not by choice, but by necessity. The arrival of the Anunnaki on Earth was a triumph of technology and determination. Their great ships settled in the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, a region that would become their base of operations, their home away from home. But the gold, the very reason for their epic journey, was not there. Their geological surveys had indicated the richest deposits lay far to the south in the continent we now call Africa. And so, the great work began anew. Just as they had done on their home world, the Anunnaki assigned the difficult physical labor to the lesser gods, the Igigi, who had journeyed with them to this new world. Once again, the Igigi were sent into the depths of the earth, tasked with excavating the precious metal. The conditions were brutal. The African sun was relentless. The environment was alien and hostile, and the work was just as grueling and soul-crushing as it had been on Nibiru. They were still gods, but they were also still laborers, and the familiar feelings of exhaustion and resentment began to resurface, simmering beneath the alien soil. History, it seems, has a tendency to repeat itself even among the stars. The Igigi, having traveled across the vastness of space only to find themselves in another mine, another pit of despair, finally reached their breaking point. Just as their brethren had done on Nibiru, they revolted. They threw down their tools, their anger echoing under the foreign sky. They refused to continue their rebellion, once again bringing the Anunnaki's critical mission to a grinding halt. The crisis demanded a resolution. The great Anunnaki leaders, Enlil and Enki, were faced with the same dilemma. Their workforce had mutinied, and the flow of gold, the lifeblood of their home planet, had ceased. It was in this moment of crisis on Earth that the radical idea which had been debated on Nibiru was brought forth once more. They needed a new worker, one that would not rebel, one that was perfectly suited to the environment of this planet. They decided to create humankind to take over the heavy labor from the Igigi. But this would not be a creation of myth and magic, of mixing clay with the blood of a god in a sacred ritual. This would be a work of science, a feat of biological engineering so advanced it would appear as magic to any primitive observer. The Anunnaki did not need to create life from scratch. The planet was already teeming with it. They simply needed to find the right vessel, the right biological canvas upon which to paint their masterpiece. Their attention turned to the primitive hominids that roamed the African plains, the creatures we now know as Homo erectus. They were hardy, well adapted to the planet, but they lacked the intelligence and cognitive ability to understand complex instructions or perform sophisticated tasks. The Anunnaki saw in them the perfect raw material. They established a dedicated facility for this monumental project, a place that would become legendary. Sitchin's theory posits that the biblical Garden of Eden was, in fact, the Anunnaki's primary base of operations, a place the Sumerians called Eden, located in Mesopotamia. This was not a garden of mystical trees, but a scientific laboratory, a carefully controlled environment where the most profound biological experiment in Earth's history would take place. At the head of this project was Enki, the brilliant scientist, the master geneticist. It was he who orchestrated the capture and study of the primitive hominids. Imagine his laboratory, strange glowing consoles displaying complex genetic sequences, containment fields holding biological samples, the low, steady hum of unimaginably advanced technology. He and his team of life scientists would have carefully mapped the hominid genome, identifying the specific chromosomes and genes that governed intelligence, dexterity, and consciousness. Their goal was to upgrade this creature, to alter its DNA, to forge a new species in their own image, Homo sapiens. The process would have been incredibly delicate. They carefully combined their own sophisticated Anunnaki DNA with the genes of Homo erectus. It was a process of unlocking latent potential, of activating dormant sequences, of carefully weaving the thread of their own celestial biology into the terrestrial fabric of a native Earth creature. There would have been many failures, trial and error on a genetic level, as they worked to create a being that was both intelligent enough to serve and hardy enough to survive. Finally, they achieved success. The first human, a perfected hybrid, was created. They called him Adamu. The name itself is a deep echo of his origin, linked directly to the Hebrew word Adamah, which means earth or clay. He was, in essence, the first true man of earth, but his intellect was a gift from the stars. Picture the moment of his awakening in Enki's laboratory. Adamu opens his eyes, but for the first time, the light that enters is processed by a mind capable of true self-awareness. He is able to look at his creators not with the dull fear of an animal, but with a flicker of understanding, of curiosity, of intelligence. He was the initial being with enhanced biology and higher intelligence, making him suitable for the tasks the Anunnaki required. He was the prototype for a new race of workers. With the successful creation of Adamu, the Anunnaki now had a template. They could replicate the process, creating a workforce to toil in the mines and fields. Once the first humans were created, they were allowed to multiply and form a large labor force. And so, humanity took over the mining and other tasks previously performed by the rebellious Igigi. But this unprecedented act of creation gave rise to a deep philosophical and political division between the two most powerful Anunnaki leaders on Earth, the brothers Enki and Enlil. This conflict would shape the future of both Anunnaki and human relations for millennia to come. Enlil, the commander, the pragmatist, saw their creation, Homo sapiens, as nothing more than a tool, a sophisticated biological machine designed for a single purpose: labor. He was a staunch advocate for maintaining strict control. He believed humans should be kept sterile, unable to procreate on their own, so their numbers could be managed and their purpose never questioned. He feared that if they grew too powerful or too numerous, they would inevitably become a threat, just as the Ajiji had. His was a policy of absolute control and utility. Enki, however, saw things differently. He was the scientist, the creator, and he felt a paternal bond with the new species he had engineered. He looked at Adamu and his kin and saw not just a worker, but a reflection of his own intelligence, a child of his own genius. He argued against Enlil's cold pragmatism. He supported granting more knowledge and autonomy to humans, believing they could be more than just slaves. This fundamental disagreement, Enlil's desire for control versus Enki's push for human potential, became the central drama of the Anunnaki presence on Earth. This conflict is mirrored, according to the theory, in the biblical narrative of the Garden of Eden. The forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge was not a literal apple, but a metaphor for the genetic ability to procreate and the self-awareness that came with it. It was Enki who, in defiance of Enlil's strict orders, may have allowed humans to gain this knowledge, setting them on the path to becoming a self-sufficient species. Enlil's fury at this transgression, his fear of humans becoming as one of us, led to their expulsion from the controlled environment of the Eden laboratory. Their banishment was an act of control, an attempt to limit their access to the Anunnaki and their advanced technology, to prevent them from also eating from the tree of life and gaining the immortality of their creators. Thus, from our very inception, humanity was caught between two powerful opposing forces, one that wished to keep us as slaves and one that wished to set us free. We were born into a world of celestial politics, our destiny shaped by the rivalry between two alien brothers. We were created to be miners of gold, but we were forged with a divine spark that gave us the potential for so much more. This inherent duality, this conflict between our designed purpose and our boundless potential, would define the human story forever. With the successful creation of Homo sapiens, a new order dawned upon the earth. The labor crisis that had plagued the Anunnaki was solved. The newly fashioned human race, intelligent enough to follow complex commands yet still awed by their creators, was put to work. The great gold mining operations, which had twice been halted by the rebellion of the gods, now resumed with unprecedented efficiency. Under the watchful supervision of Anunnaki overseers, legions of human workers descended into the mines of southern Africa and other parts of the world. They toiled from sunrise to sunset, their lives dedicated to a single purpose: extracting the precious metal that would save a world they had never seen. An intricate system of production and transport was established. The raw ore was unearthed by human hands, processed in great Anunnaki-built refineries that pulsed with unknown energies, and the purified gold was then prepared for its long journey back to the dying planet, Nibiru. For the Anunnaki, it was the golden age of their mission on Earth. The flow of life-saving metal was steady, and their homeworld's atmosphere could slowly begin the long process of healing. For humanity, it was an age of servitude, but it was also an age of unprecedented transformation. The Anunnaki, having solved their labor problem, turned their attention to refining their creation. They understood that a brutish, unorganized workforce was inefficient. For humanity to serve them better, humanity needed to be civilized. And so began one of an immense educational project, a direct transfer of knowledge from the stars to the soil. The Anunnaki did not simply rule, they taught. They shared with humanity the foundational pillars of civilization, knowledge in fields like astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and agriculture. Imagine a group of early humans, their minds newly awakened, gathered at the feet of an Anunnaki teacher. They were shown how to look at the sky not as a random scattering of lights, but as a predictable celestial clock. They learned to map the constellations, to track the movements of the sun and moon, and to create the first calendars based on these celestial cycles. This knowledge was not for philosophical enlightenment, it was practical. It allowed them to predict seasons, to know the precise time for planting and for harvest, dramatically increasing their food production and allowing their population to grow. In mathematics, they were introduced to the sexagesimal system, the base 60 numerical system that we still use today to measure our time and our circles. It was a sophisticated system that allowed for complex calculations essential for construction and astronomical prediction. They were taught the principles of geometry, how to survey land, and the architectural knowledge needed to build more than just mud huts. Under their guidance, the first cities of Mesopotamia began to rise, organized and durable, a stark contrast to the scattered nomadic camps that had come before. This sudden explosion of high culture in ancient Sumer, which puzzles mainstream historians, is explained in this theory as a direct result of this divine curriculum. Humanity was not evolving randomly, it was being educated. To the fledgling human race, their teachers were nothing short of gods. This perception was not just a result of their superior knowledge, but also of their very physical presence. The Anunnaki are described in ancient records and reliefs as giant beings compared to humans, with an estimated height ranging from 10 to 16 feet or 3 to 5 meters. Their immense stature alone would have given them an imposing, otherworldly presence, contributing to their perception as gods. Many are also believed to have had large, elongated skulls, a feature seen in the artwork of many ancient cultures that came into contact with them. Imagine an early human looking up and up at one of these beings. Their skin was sometimes described with a golden or bronze-toned hue, a possible link to their extraterrestrial origins. They wore elaborate attire made from materials unfamiliar to humans of that era, robes and armor that seemed to hum with a life of their own, perhaps incorporating technological capabilities like personal energy fields. The wings seen in some Mesopotamian carvings were likely not biological, but symbols of their ability to fly, either through personal devices or in their sky chariots, further cementing their divine aura. Their remarkable longevity, their lifespans stretching for thousands of Earth years, would have made them appear truly immortal in the eyes of the short-lived humans. When a being of immense size, strange appearance, and seemingly eternal life shares knowledge that can transform the world, it is only natural that they would be revered and worshipped as a god. For millennia, the Anunnaki ruled directly, walking among humans, overseeing their work and guiding their development. But their time on Earth was not meant to be permanent. As the situation on Nibiru began to stabilize, and as their own internal conflicts and family dramas continued to unfold, the Anunnaki leadership began to plan for a more hands-off approach to managing the planet. They did not intend to entirely relinquish control over human affairs. Instead, they devised a new system of governance. Rather than ruling directly, they appointed human kings to act as representatives of their divine authority. This was the dawn of kingship, a concept that, according to the Sumerian tablets, descended from heaven. The Anunnaki chose the first human monarchs, bestowing upon them the symbols of power and the mandate to rule in the name of the gods. The role of these kings was clear. They were to follow the will of the Anunnaki, maintain order among the human population, and ensure the enforcement of the divine laws on Earth. To further solidify this new power structure, the lines between human and God were sometimes deliberately blurred. In some instances, it was said that the first kings were direct descendants of the Anunnaki, born from unions between the gods and human women. This created the powerful and enduring concept of divine blood, the belief that royalty was inherently part God, a notion that would persist throughout ancient civilizations for thousands of years, justifying the absolute power of monarchs. The most stunning record of this era is the Sumerian King List, a collection of clay tablets discovered in various archaeological sites in Mesopotamia. This document details the succession of Sumerian kings, spanning from what it calls the mythical eras to historical periods. What is astonishing about the list is the reign of the earliest kings, those who ruled before a great catastrophic flood. The lengths of their reigns are described as spanning millennia, impossibly long for any normal human. The list identifies Alulim as the first human king ruling after kingship descended from heaven. It states that Alulim reigned over the city of Eridu for an astonishing 28,800 years. His successor, Alalgar, ruled for 36 years. Another king, Enmenluwana, governed for 43,200 years. These are not simply large numbers. They are precise, deliberate records. From a conventional perspective, these reigns are dismissed as mythological exaggerations. But within the Anunnaki extraterrestrial hypothesis, they are seen as a literal record. Researchers who support this theory suggest these early rulers were not mortal men. They were either Anunnaki leaders ruling directly over humans, or they were first-generation human extraterrestrial hybrids, beings who shared the extended lifespans of their celestial parents. Coming from a planet like Nibiru with a vastly different and longer temporal cycle, the Anunnaki and their direct offspring would have experienced time differently, their lives stretching across ages that would seem like an eternity to the humans they ruled. The king list, therefore, is seen as the ultimate proof of this period of direct contact and intermingling, a time when gods and their hybrid children reigned on Earth, managing the great empire of gold they had created. The great Anunnaki enterprise on Earth was, by all measures, a resounding success. Their mission to save Nibiru was proceeding, and the new human race they had created proved to be an efficient and capable workforce. Under their guidance, humanity blossomed. Cities grew, knowledge expanded, and a vibrant civilization began to spread across the plains of Mesopotamia. But the very success of humanity began to sow the seeds of its own destruction. For the Anunnaki, particularly for their stern commander, Enlil, humanity was becoming a problem. The issue, as remembered in the ancient texts, was the noise of humanity. This was not merely a literal sound, though the clamor of bustling cities and a rapidly expanding population undoubtedly grated on the sensibilities of the gods. It was the noise of a species coming into its own. Humanity was growing too numerous, their thoughts too complex, their ambitions too loud. They were beginning to display a troubling degree of disobedience, a consequence of the very intelligence Enki had gifted them. They were no longer the simple, compliant tools Enlil had envisioned. They were becoming a chaotic, unpredictable force, and Enlil, a being who prized order and control above all else, saw this as an existential threat. In his eyes, Enki's grand experiment had spun out of control. He feared that humanity, with its growing numbers and God-given intellect, would eventually challenge the Anunnaki for dominion over the earth. He saw the potential for another rebellion, not from the gods this time, but from their own creations. He grew weary of humanity, and in his weariness, a terrible resolve began to form. The experiment had to be terminated. Once again, the great Anunnaki Council was convened, but this time the atmosphere was not one of crisis resolution, but of grim judgment. Enlil stood before the assembly and made his case. He argued that humanity had become a plague upon the earth, their noise disturbing the very heavens. He proposed a final cleansing solution. A great flood was coming, a natural, cyclical cataclysm caused by complex gravitational forces as Nibiru made a close pass through the solar system. Enlil's proposal was simple and ruthless. They would do nothing. They would allow the deluge to wipe the slate clean, to eradicate humankind from the face of the planet, and they would all swear an oath of secrecy to never reveal the coming doom to their creations. Enki, the creator of humanity, was horrified. He argued passionately against the plan, pleading for the lives of the beings he had come to see as his children. He reminded the council of their intelligence, their capacity for art and music, their potential, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The council, swayed by Enlil's fears and perhaps tired of the messy complexities of their earthbound project, sided with the commander. The decision was made. Humanity was condemned to perish. Bound by the council's oath, Enki was forbidden from warning humanity directly, but the god of wisdom was also a master of ingenuity. He could not break his oath, but he could bend it. He devised a secret plan to save one small flicker of the human flame. He chose a man who was righteous and faithful, a man whose name echoes through our oldest stories, Ziusudra to the Sumerians, Utnapishtim to the Babylonians, who would later tell his tale to the hero Gilgamesh, and in the Hebrew tradition, he would be remembered as Noah. Enki could not speak to his chosen survivor face to face, so he spoke to the wall of the man's reed hut, knowing Ziusudra was on the other side, listening. Wall, wall, reed, wall, reed, wall. He whispered, dismantle your house, build a boat, abandon your property, save your life. He gave Ziusudra precise and detailed instructions, the specifications for a great vessel that could withstand the coming storm. He instructed him to build an ark, to cover it with pitch and bitumen, and to bring aboard his family and the seeds of all living things, from the animals of the field to the beasts of the wild. Ziusudra, trusting the voice of his god, did exactly as he was commanded, working tirelessly to build the great ship that would be the last refuge for life on Earth. Then the flood began. It was a storm of terrifying, unnatural magnitude. The heavens roared and the earth rumbled. For 7 days and 7 nights, as the Epic of Gilgamesh tells it, or for 40 days and 40 nights according to the book of Genesis, the deluge consumed the world. Waters engulfed the land, rising so high that all mountains were submerged, and everything that lived and breathed on the surface of the earth was destroyed. The cataclysm was so immense that it terrified not only humanity, but the gods themselves. In a stunning admission recorded in the ancient texts, the Anunnaki who had unleashed this devastation were themselves overcome with fear. They fled to the highest heavens, cowering like beaten dogs, frightened by the sheer, uncontrollable power of the storm they had allowed to happen. They watched from their celestial perch as the world they had spent eons shaping was unmade in a matter of days. Aboard the ark, Ziusudra and his family drifted on the endless churning waters. Finally, the storms abated and the waters began to recede. Ziusudra sent out a dove and then a swallow, both of which returned, finding no place to land. Later, as told in both the Gilgamesh epic and Genesis, he sent out a raven, which did not come back, a sign that dry land had finally emerged from the waters. The ark came to rest on the peak of a mountain, and its passengers re-emerged into a silent, devastated world, a world washed clean of life. When the Anunnaki descended from the heavens, they saw the earth left in ruins, and they saw Sudra's ark. Enlil was furious when he discovered that some humans had survived, his plan for total annihilation thwarted. But Enki revealed his role, and the other gods, having witnessed the terrifying destruction and perhaps feeling a sense of regret, now reconsidered their actions. They chose not to annihilate the survivors. It was in this moment, standing on the shores of a new, empty world, that the Anunnaki made their second great decision regarding the fate of humanity. They would allow humanity to continue, but never again would they be allowed to grow so powerful, so numerous, so noisy, that they could threaten the gods. They decided to implement a permanent biological limitation. According to the theory, they altered human DNA once more. They did not cripple us, but they put a governor on our potential. They drastically reduced our longevity, shortening our lifespans from the near immortality of our earliest ancestors to the fleeting decades we know today. In addition, it is speculated that they limited some of the advanced physical and cognitive abilities initially granted to us by them. In this way, post-flood humans would be easier to control and less likely to challenge authority. It was a cosmic reset, a genetic pruning to ensure humanity remained a manageable asset rather than a potential rival. The evidence for this profound change is written directly in the ancient records. The Sumerian king list marks a clear and dramatic division between the reigns of the kings before the flood and those who came after. The pre-flood kings, like Ulurum, ruled for tens of thousands of years. But after the flood, the reigns, while still long by our standards, are drastically shorter. A king named Enmebergesi of Kish reigned for 900 years, and the great hero Gilgamesh of Uruk had a reign of 126 years. This is a precipitous drop, a clear line in the sand. The same pattern appears in the Bible. The pre-flood patriarchs like Methuselah and Noah lived for many centuries, but after the flood, the lifespans of succeeding generations grew shorter and shorter. The flood, therefore, was more than just a catastrophic event. It was the moment the gods, having almost destroyed their creation, decided to rebuild it with inherent limitations. It was the end of the age of heroes and god kings, and the beginning of the age of mortal man, our days forever shortened by a divine decree born from fear. In the aftermath of the Great Flood, the earth was a world washed clean, a blank slate. The fledgling civilizations of humanity were gone, and the survivors, led by Sudra and his family, faced the monumental task of beginning anew. But they were not alone. The Anunnaki, having reconsidered their decision to abandon humanity, now took on the role of divine patrons, teaching the survivors how to rebuild civilization from the ruins of the old world. This time, however, the rebuilding effort would serve a dual purpose. It would reestablish human society, and it would create a new, permanent infrastructure on the planet, an infrastructure of such scale and precision that it would endure for eons, serving the long-term cosmic purposes of the Anunnaki themselves. Thus began the age of megalithic construction. It is speculated that their advanced technology enabled them to construct these incredible structures. And at the heart of this global project lies the most iconic and enigmatic location on Earth, the Giza Plateau in modern-day Egypt. Let your mind travel there to the edge of the desert and stand before the Great Pyramid. Mainstream archaeology suggests it was built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu over a span of approximately 20 years. But a deeper look at the sheer scale of the undertaking raises profound questions. The structure consists of around 2 million stone blocks. These are not simple bricks. Their average weight is 2.5 tons, the equivalent of a large car, and the massive granite blocks used deep within the inner chambers weigh up to 70 tons apiece. Consider the logistics required to complete this in just 2 decades. To place 2 million blocks in 20 years, workers would have had to quarry, transport, shape, and perfectly position one block every few minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is calculated that around 800 blocks would have had to be placed each day. This would require a level of logistics, coordination, and physical power that challenges the imagination, even with a massive workforce using the primitive technology of the era. But the mystery deepens beyond just the scale. The Great Pyramid is a masterpiece of geometric and astronomical precision. Its faces are aligned almost perfectly with the 4 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. Furthermore, some researchers have famously proposed that the layout of the 3 Giza pyramids is a deliberate terrestrial map of the 3 stars in Orion's belt. Why would a terrestrial tomb for a human pharaoh be so obsessively focused on the heavens? It is here that the Anunnaki theory offers a breathtaking alternative. Zechariah Sitchin and other proponents have suggested that the pyramids served purposes far beyond being mere tombs or monuments. They propose that these were highly advanced, functional structures designed for scientific and technological purposes. Perhaps they were immense navigation markers for spacecraft approaching the planet, their positions and alignments part of a grand celestial GPS system. Or perhaps they were energy management hubs designed to harness and transmit the natural energies of the earth. Some modern alternative theories even speculate that the Anunnaki may have used anti-gravity technology or some form of free energy to transport and place the massive blocks, which would explain the seemingly impossible construction speed and precision. Guarding this incredible complex is the Great Sphinx of Giza, a creature that has puzzled archaeologists for centuries due to its age and the absence of clear records regarding its construction. While traditional theories suggest it was built around 400-500 years ago during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, some theorists, pointing to water erosion patterns on its enclosure, argue that it is far, far older, predating the pharaohs by thousands of years. In the Anunnaki narrative, the Sphinx could have been erected much earlier, built by them or under their direct supervision, a silent sentinel representing a guardian of the secrets of their extraterrestrial civilization. The megalithic fingerprints of these gods are not confined to the sands of Egypt. These great edifices are thought to be part of a global system, encompassing other monumental constructions in various regions of the world. Let us travel now across the ocean to the Americas, where we find echoes of the same impossible scale and celestial obsession. Near modern-day Mexico City lies the ancient city of Teotihuacan. Even the later Aztecs, who flourished centuries after Teotihuacan's collapse, held the site in deep reverence. They believed it was the place where the gods had created the present sun and moon, and they named it the City of the Gods. The city was designed with precise astronomical alignment. Its central axis, the Great Avenue of the Dead, appears to correspond with the sun's movement on specific significant days of the year. The pyramids of the sun and the moon, which dominate the landscape, also have direct connections to the solar calendar and astronomical alignments. Again, we see a culture obsessed with the stars, building on a scale that defies easy explanation. Nearby stands another wonder, the Great Pyramid of Cholula, the largest pyramid by volume in the entire world. It is argued that its immense scale and complexity suggest knowledge far beyond what local cultures of the time would have possessed on their own. The pattern is consistent, colossal structures, mathematically precise designs, and an unwavering focus on the cosmos. Of course, conventional archaeology offers explanations for these marvels. The consensus is that the Egyptians, for example, had access to a large and highly skilled workforce, not of slaves, but of respected citizens who were provided with food, shelter, and medical care. They quarried limestone locally and transported granite from Aswan, hundreds of miles away, using boats and canals along the Nile. Ancient reliefs depict workers using large sledges to drag stones, possibly pouring water on the sand ahead of them to reduce friction. A complex system of ram straight, zigzag, or encircling the Pyramides, the most widely accepted theory for how they moved the stones to higher levels. Yet, even these explanations leave room for doubt. The exact methods for lifting and placing the most massive 70-ton blocks at the highest levels remain uncertain and a subject of intense debate. While ongoing research continues to uncover new information, without definitive evidence, the precise techniques of the ancient builders remain a historical mystery. It is within this mystery, within the gaps of our understanding, that the Anunnaki hypothesis finds its fertile ground. Are these magnificent structures simply the product of human devotion and ingenuity, the ultimate expression of ancient faith? Or are they something more? Are they the silent, enduring evidence of a time when giants walked the earth, when gods raised mountains of stone not as monuments to mortals, but as functional components in a planetary machine, a technological legacy whose true purpose we have long forgotten? They are the fingerprints of the gods, left for us to wonder at, to measure, and perhaps one day to fully understand. If the Anunnaki possessed the technological capability to quarry mountains and erect monuments that defy the ages, it stands to reason that their mastery extended far beyond simple construction. The same hands that could place a 70-ton granite block with hair's breadth precision would surely have wielded other tools, other forms of power that have since faded from our history into the realm of magic and myth. What if these myths are not fantasies, but the distorted echoes of technology so advanced our ancestors could only describe them as divine? Throughout the history of ancient Mesopotamia, stories abound of the gods' weapons, artifacts of immense power used to establish their rule and wage their own celestial wars. Sumerian texts frequently mention the concept of the Me, a collection of divine powers or decrees that were foundational to their civilization. While often interpreted as sociological concepts like kingship or priesthood, some theorists propose that the Me symbolized something far more tangible: advanced technological knowledge, perhaps stored on crystalline data devices. One of these Me could have been a weapon of mass destruction that the commander Enlil used in his battles for control of the earth. Mythological accounts describe Enlil wielding the evil wind, a fearsome weapon depicted as a destructive storm that ravaged cities and unleashed chaos upon his enemies. To an ancient observer, what would a nuclear explosion or a sophisticated climate-altering weapon look like? It would look like an evil wind, a storm that poisons the land and from which nothing can escape. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains passages that read less like poetry and more like the aftermath of a modern bombing run. The heavens roared and the earth rumbled. Then a profound silence fell and darkness hovered. Lightning flashed and a fire broke out. Where the blaze grew thickest, death rained down. Is this a description of a mythological event or a vivid account of a massive, technologically induced explosion? The theme of advanced weaponry is not unique to Mesopotamia. If we travel to ancient India, we find even more explicit descriptions in their sacred texts. The Mahabharata, an epic over 300 years old, is filled with mentions of incredible flying vehicles and devastating weapons. It describes battles between gods and heroes using weapons like the Brahmastra. One passage reads, "Then Arjuna invoked the Brahmastra. In an instant, all darkness was dispelled, cool winds began to blow, and all directions of the sky became clear and bright. The power to alter the very atmosphere in an instant speaks to a technology far beyond swords and spears." These flying vehicles, called vimanas, are described in great detail in other texts. They are depicted as craft used by gods and celestial beings to traverse the earth and sky, capable of performing incredible maneuvers and flying at great speeds. Some accounts even state that vimanas were equipped with powerful weapons capable of emitting rays or producing fire. These descriptions are so akin to modern aircraft and spacecraft that it's hard to dismiss them as mere poetic fancy. Even the Bible may contain echoes of such an event. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction, where fire and brimstone rained from the sky and reduced the cities to ash, has been interpreted by some theorists as an account of an extraterrestrial weapon being deployed. Zecharia Sitchin argued that geological studies of the Dead Sea region show signs of a large, ancient explosion, though this claim remains highly controversial. Beyond weapons, the Anunnaki's mastery of movement itself suggests a profound understanding of physics that we are only just beginning to explore. Some interpretations suggest the Anunnaki traveled from Nibiru aboard advanced spacecraft capable of covering vast distances in a short time, perhaps through wormholes or by manipulating the fabric of space-time. Others theorize that the Anunnaki created interdimensional portals for instantaneous travel. This incredible technology could explain the many myths found in cultures across the globe about gates to the underworld. In Mesopotamian mythology, the underworld, known as Irkala, was a realm that could only be reached by passing through 7 gates. In Mayan mythology, the terrifying underworld of Xibalba was accessible through subterranean caves deep in the jungle. The ancient Egyptians believed their own underworld, Duat, was accessible through hidden doors, and a deceased pharaoh had to pass through 12 guarded gates to reach the afterlife. Could these stories of spiritual journeys through gates be a faded memory of physical, technological portals, ancient locations of dimensional doorways controlled and manipulated by the Anunnaki? This concept of a single technologically advanced civilization influencing the entire globe leads to the most tantalizing possibility of all, that the gods of ancient human cultures were not different gods, but were, in fact, the very same group of Anunnaki beings, known by different names in different lands. The pantheons of our ancestors may be nothing more than regional aliases for the same board of directors. Let us look at the echoes. In Mesopotamia, the king of the gods was Anu, the great god of the sky and father of the pantheon. In Egypt, the supreme creator god, the father of all other deities, was the sun god Ra. Anu's son, Enlil, was the powerful god of air, wind, and storms. In Egypt, his counterpart can be found in Shu, the god of air, who separated the sky from the earth. Enki, the Sumerian god of water, wisdom, creation, and magic, finds a striking parallel in the Egyptian god Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and magic. He also shares traits with Ptah, the Egyptian creator god and patron of artisans, reflecting Enki's role as the divine engineer who crafted humanity. This pattern repeats across the ocean. In the Americas, the Sumerian Anu, the celestial creator god, can be compared to the Mayan god, Itzamna, or the Aztec deity Ometeotl, both of whom were seen as the ultimate creator gods of the universe. The stormy Enlil finds his counterpart in the Mayan god Huracan, or the Aztec god of storms and weather, Tlaloc, and the wise Enki aligns almost perfectly with Quetzalcoatl, the great feathered serpent god worshipped by the Olmecs, Mayans, and Aztecs, who was associated with wisdom, knowledge, creation, and learning. Perhaps the most profound connection lies within the traditions of the Abrahamic faiths through a mysterious ancient text known as the Book of Enoch. This text, which is excluded from most biblical canons, describes a group of celestial beings called the Watchers, who descended to earth. These Watchers took human wives, an act for which they are considered fallen angels, and produced a race of giant offspring called the Nephilim. These Nephilim are described as colossal beings of extraordinary strength, their physical dominance over humans mirroring the descriptions of the Anunnaki. The parallels are startling. Could the Watchers be another name for a group of Anunnaki who broke their own laws? Could their giant offspring, the Nephilim, be the same class of human extraterrestrial hybrids as the demigod kings of Sumer, like Gilgamesh? The Book of Enoch states that these fallen angels shared advanced and forbidden knowledge with humanity, just as the Anunnaki did. And it states that the Nephilim became so destructive that their existence was deemed intolerable. To cleanse the earth of the corruption brought by the fallen angels and the Nephilim, God decided to send the Great Flood. Here we see the Mesopotamian and Hebrew narratives converge on the same epic event for the same proposed reason: to wipe the slate clean of a powerful hybrid race that had grown out of control. When viewed through this lens, the fragmented myths of our ancestors begin to coalesce into a single, cohesive, and deeply unsettling global history. A story of one group of powerful beings whose actions and conflicts were recorded and remembered across the entire planet, their names changing with the languages of the people who worship them, but their stories remaining remarkably and technologically the same. For millennia, the Anunnaki walked among us, their presence shaping our biology, our societies, and our world. They were our gods, our kings, our teachers, and our taskmasters. But their time on Earth, like all great cycles, eventually came to an end. The reasons for their departure were likely complex. The primary mission that had brought them here, the mining of gold to save their home world, had largely been accomplished, and the situation on Nibiru began to stabilize, lessening the urgency of their earthbound operation. Furthermore, the endless internal conflicts and challenges to the authority of Anunnaki leaders, particularly the bitter rivalry between the brothers Enki and Enlil, had created a persistent atmosphere of discord. The great cosmic drama had run its course. Their departure was not a sudden vanishing, it was a slow, gradual withdrawal. The great ships that once soared above the ziggurats and pyramids began to leave, one by one, their fiery ascensions becoming rarer and more sporadic. The great gods, who had walked among humans and were worshipped as deities, started to withdraw from public life, their direct interactions with humanity ceasing. Anunnaki technology became sporadic, and their profound teachings, once direct lessons, slowly transformed into the myths and legends we know today. The age of the gods was over. But what if not all of them left? This question has given rise to one of the most intriguing and modern speculative theories, the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis. This theory suggests that some UFO sightings and their related phenomena are not extraterrestrial at all, but are instead manifestations of a hidden civilization that has coexisted with humanity on Earth for millennia. Proponents of the Anunnaki narrative have merged this idea with their own, suggesting that while most of the Anunnaki departed for Nibiru, a small contingent may have stayed behind on Earth. These remaining Anunnaki would have used their vastly superior technology to remain undetected, retreating into the most inaccessible parts of our world. Perhaps they established bases deep within the Earth's crust, in the crushing pressures of our deepest oceans, or, as some speculate, beneath the vast, unexplored ice sheets of Antarctica. From these hidden strongholds, they could continue to observe the progress of their creation, their presence felt only through fleeting, inexplicable events that we label as UFO sightings or paranormal phenomena. It's a startling thought that the strange lights in our skies belong not to new visitors, but to the original landlords of the planet, the ancient gods of Sumer. Some accounts from alleged UFO witnesses describe beings who are larger than human, almost giant-like, a description that aligns perfectly with the ancient interpretations of the Anunnaki. While this remnant group may remain hidden on Earth, the question of their home world, Nibiru, has itself resurfaced in the heart of modern science. For decades, the planet supposedly home to the Anunnaki has been dismissed by the scientific community as a myth. Recently, however, astronomers from NASA and other institutions have been discussing the possible existence of a ninth major planet in our solar system, which they have tentatively named Planet 9. The evidence for this planet is indirect, but compelling. Astronomers noticed that certain objects in the Kuiper Belt, a distant region of icy bodies beyond Neptune, had strange, highly unusual orbits that could not be explained by the gravitational pull of the known planets. These strange orbits may be influenced by the gravitational pull of a large, distant, and as yet unseen planet. The calculated properties of this theoretical Planet 9 are astonishingly similar to the descriptions of Nibiru. Calculations suggest that Planet 9 would have a mass approximately 10 times that of Earth, and its orbital period, the time it takes to circle the Sun, would be vastly longer than Earth's. While Earth completes its orbit in 365 days, Planet 9 would take somewhere between 10, 0, and 20, 0 years to do the same, following a highly elliptical path that takes it far beyond Neptune's orbit. While the planet has yet to be observed directly, the mathematical evidence continues to mount. Could it be that our most advanced scientific instruments are only now confirming the existence of a world that our most ancient ancestors recorded on clay tablets thousands of years ago? This possibility that their world is real and that some of their kind may still be here leads to the final and most profound piece of the puzzle, the prophecy of their return. Some interpretations of Sumerian tablets suggest that the Anunnaki did not just leave. They promised to one day come back, a return that could trigger irreversible changes for humanity. The consequences of such a return are almost impossible to fully comprehend. One potential outcome would be the final, undeniable revelation of the true origins of humanity. We would have to confront the reality that we are not the product of blind evolution, but the result of deliberate genetic manipulation by an extraterrestrial race. This could spark an existential crisis on a global scale, but it could also mark the beginning of a new, enlightened era for our species. Perhaps their return would mark the beginning of humanity's formal contact with a wider network of galactic civilizations, with the Anunnaki acting as our guides and sponsors. This is not the only prophecy about intelligent extraterrestrial beings visiting our planet. In fact, it is an echo found in the traditions of many indigenous cultures. The Native American Hopi tribe has a rich tradition of myths about star beings, entities that descended from the heavens to interact with humans. One of their most intriguing legends is that of the Star Children, who are said to be the direct descendants of these extraterrestrial entities, born from unions between the star beings and tribal women. These children are said to have a vital purpose, to restore balance to the world and prepare Earth for the arrival of a celestial being who will mark the end of the current cycle of humanity and the beginning of a new era. Similarly, the Dogon people of Mali hold a fascinating belief in beings called the Namos, who they say came from the Sirius star system in a spacecraft. The Namos are described as hybrid beings, part human and part fish, who gave the Dogon their sacred and secret knowledge. Most remarkably, the Dogon possess astonishingly advanced astronomical knowledge of the Sirius system, including details about its companion star, Sirius Ba white dwarf, whose small size and immense density were only confirmed by modern science in the 20th century. While some researchers argue the Dogon may have acquired this knowledge from contact with European missionaries, the Dogon themselves insist it was a gift from their ancient teachers, the Nomos, who promised to one day return. Whether we look to the clay tablets of Sumer, the kivas of the Hopi, or the sacred rites of the Dogon, a single, unifying story emerges. A story of powerful beings who came from the stars, who created or profoundly altered humanity, who taught us, who ruled us, and who then departed, leaving behind a legacy of megalithic structures, fragmented myths, and an enduring promise that their time away is only temporary and that one day they will return. Whether that return heralds a golden age or a final judgment remains the ultimate unanswered question, whispered in the silence between the stars. And so, our long journey through the annals of myth and theory comes to a gentle close. We have traveled from the dusty plains of ancient Sumer to the hypothetical, dying world of Nibiru. We have witnessed the burdens of the lesser gods, seen humanity forged in the laboratories of our creators, and survived a world-cleansing flood. We have stood in the shadow of megalithic structures that seem to defy time, and we have listened to the ancient, whispered prophecies of a celestial return. It is a grand and deeply compelling narrative, and yet it is essential, as we float here on the edge of sleep, to acknowledge the other side of this ancient coin. For the vast majority of scientists, archaeologists, and historians, the idea that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials who came to Earth lacks evidence. From the perspective of mainstream science, no definitive archaeological remains have been found to suggest extraterrestrial technology or contact between ancient civilizations and beings from other planets. It is argued that the ancient mythologies are complex and symbolic, and that isolating specific elements from their cultural context can be misleading. These accounts of celestial beings descending from the sky are seen not as literal events, but as beautiful, symbolic representations of natural or cosmic forces. The stories of our creation, in this view, were meant to explain the origins of life and society in a way our ancestors could understand, rather than being a literal record of genetic engineering. And the great pyramids of Egypt, for all their wonder, do not require extraterrestrial intervention to be explained. The scientific consensus is that they were built by a large, skilled, and highly organized workforce of human beings, a testament to their own remarkable ingenuity and devotion. These two stories, one of alien gods and one of human achievement, seem to stand in opposition. But perhaps, for tonight, they do not have to. The true value of this journey lies not in finding a definitive answer, but in the wonder of the questions themselves. Exploring these theories encourages us to keep an open mind, to challenge our assumptions, and to nurture our own sense of curiosity. But for now, the time for questions is over. Let these grand cosmic debates dissolve. Let the clamor of gods and the toil of humankind fade into a gentle, distant hum. Let the mysteries of the pyramids and the secrets of our DNA rest. They will all be there for you tomorrow. Tonight, there is only the quiet comfort of your bed, the gentle weight of your blanket, and the soft rhythm of your own breathing. The stars will continue to wheel silently overhead, keeping their secrets, and you are free to let go, free to drift on the quiet, peaceful tide that carries you now deeper and deeper into the soft, silent, and welcoming stillness of sleep.